The fluorescent lights of the Shark Tank studio blazed down like interrogation lamps, but Harper felt every photon as validation. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the prototype in her arms, a sleek, curved device that looked like nothing the world had ever seen before. Behind the cameras, she could hear the shuffle of feet, the whispered conversations of producers, and somewhere in the distance, the mechanical hum of air conditioning that reminded her of late nights in her makeshift garage laboratory. "Are you ready, Harper?" The production assistant's voice cut through her reverie, clipboard in hand, headset crackling with static. "Remember, you have exactly 2 minutes to make your pitch. Then the sharks will start questioning." Harper nodded, her throat suddenly dry as parchment. She thought about the journey that had brought her here. 3 years of mockery, doubt, and sleepless nights. 3 years since her brother Marcus had laughed so hard at her idea that he'd literally fallen off his chair in their parents' kitchen, spilling coffee across her carefully drawn blueprints. What?" he had gasped between fits of laughter. "Harper, seriously? You want to solve that problem? That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Nobody's going to buy that." The memory stung even now, but it also fueled the fire that had carried her through every rejection, every failed prototype, every maxed-out credit card. Marcus wasn't here today. He was probably at home, in their childhood bedroom, playing video games and complaining about his dead-end retail job. But Harper was here, in the belly of the beast, about to face 5 millionaires who could change her life forever. "Harper Chen, you're up in 30 seconds, another voice called out. She closed her eyes and let her fingers trace the smooth surface of her invention. The Smart Garden Pod, a revolutionary hydroponic system that could grow fresh vegetables in any small space, using a combination of AI-driven nutrient delivery, LED grow lights that mimicked natural sunlight patterns, and a water recycling system that was 90% more efficient than traditional gardening. It had started as a desperate attempt to grow fresh food in her tiny studio apartment, born from the frustration of watching expensive organic vegetables rot in her refrigerator while she worked 16-hour days at her corporate consulting job. The idea had crystallized one particularly brutal winter evening when she'd come home to find her latest grocery haul, $60 worth of kale, spinach, and herbs, reduced to a slimy, expensive mess. She'd been surviving on takeout and frozen meals for months, her health deteriorating, her energy flagging. That night, she'd sketched her first design on a napkin, a compact system that could fit on a kitchen counter and grow fresh produce year-round. But the path from napkin sketch to this moment had been paved with obstacles that would have broken a lesser spirit. "Harper, you're on in 10, 9, 8. Her best friend Sarah had believed in her from the beginning. Sarah Martinez, a software engineer with kind eyes and an infectious laugh, had spent countless weekends in Harper's garage helping her wire circuits and debug the AI algorithms that controlled the growing environment. "You're going to change how people eat," she had said, during one of their marathon building sessions, her hands stained with soil and her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. "Fresh food shouldn't be a luxury for rich people." Then there was Mr. Patel, her elderly neighbor who had become an unexpected ally. The 78-year-old retired engineer had knocked on her garage door one Saturday morning, drawn by the sound of power tools and cursing. Instead of complaining about the noise, he'd peered over her shoulder at the prototype and nodded approvingly. "Ah, hydroponics, very clever. But your water circulation system, it needs work." He'd become her unofficial mentor, sharing decades of engineering wisdom, and occasionally bringing her homemade samosas when her work sessions stretched past midnight. The countdown reached 0, and Harper stepped into the bright arena of dreams and crushing disappointment. The Shark Tank set stretched before her like a modern coliseum. 5 leather chairs arranged in a semicircle, each occupied by a business titan who had the power to validate 3 years of struggle or demolish her dreams in minutes. Mark Cuban leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Barbara Corcoran sat forward, her sharp eyes already analyzing Harper's posture, her confidence, her potential. Lori Greiner, the queen of QVC, examined her perfectly manicured nails with casual disinterest. Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful himself, wore his trademark smirk, ready to pounce on any sign of weakness. And Robert Herjavec, the cybersecurity mogul, studied her with the intensity of a chess master planning his next move. "Hello, Sharks," Harper began, her voice stronger than she felt. "My name is Harper, and I'm here seeking $150,000 for 15% of my company, Fresh Growth Technologies." She lifted her prototype, and the studio lights caught its elegant curves, the subtle glow of its LED array, the whisper-quiet hum of its circulation system. 3 years ago, I was a burned-out consultant who couldn't keep a basil plant alive. I was spending a fortune on organic produce that would spoil before I could eat it, and I was slowly poisoning myself with processed food. I knew there had to be a better way. The Sharks were listening, but their expressions remained neutral. Harper had expected this. They heard hundreds of pitches, and most of them were garbage. She had 60 seconds to prove she wasn't part of that majority. The Smart Garden Pod isn't just another gadget. It's a complete food production system that fits on your kitchen counter. Using advanced AI, precision LED lighting, and a closed-loop water system, it can grow up to 12 different vegetables simultaneously, producing fresh food 365 days a year while using 90% less water than traditional gardening. She activated the demonstration model, and the pod came to life. Soft, natural-looking light illuminated perfectly healthy lettuce, cherry tomatoes, and herbs growing in neat rows. The gentle sound of circulating water created an almost zen-like atmosphere in the harsh studio environment. The average American family spends $2,400 per year on fresh produce. The Smart Garden Pod pays for itself in 8 months while providing food that's fresher, more nutritious, and free from pesticides and chemicals. Barbara Corcoran leaned forward, and Harper caught a flicker of interest in her eyes. "Harper, this looks impressive, but the market is flooded with hydroponic systems. What makes yours different?" This was the question Harper had been preparing for. She touched a panel on the pod's sleek surface, and a smartphone app interface appeared on the studio's large screen. Traditional hydroponic systems require expertise and constant monitoring. The Smart Garden Pod is autonomous. The AI learns your family's consumption patterns and optimizes growing cycles accordingly. If you eat a lot of salads, it grows more lettuce. If you love fresh herbs in your cooking, it prioritizes basil and cilantro. It even orders its own supplies and can detect plant diseases before they spread. Mark Cuban uncrossed his arms, a good sign. "What are your sales so far?" "I've been bootstrapping this for 3 years. I've sold 43 units through my website at $899 each, generating $38,557 in revenue. But more importantly, I have a waiting list of 2,847 customers who want to pre-order as soon as I can scale production." The numbers hung in the air like a challenge. Harper knew they were modest compared to some Shark Tank success stories, but they represented something more valuable than money. They represented proof of concept, validation from real customers who had seen the value in her vision. The real opportunity isn't just selling units. It's creating a subscription ecosystem. Seed pods, nutrients, replacement parts, every customer generates recurring revenue of approximately $30 per month. With my current customer base, that's already $1,300 in monthly recurring revenue, and it grows with every unit sold. Kevin O'Leary's eyes lit up at the mention of recurring revenue. Money was his love language, and Harper was speaking it fluently. But as she stood there, basking in the focused attention of 5 business legends, Harper's mind flashed back to that devastating day in her parents' kitchen. Marcus had been home from college, full of himself and his business degree, ready to lecture his younger sister about real-world economics. "Harper, do you have any idea how competitive the appliance market is?" he had said, wiping coffee off her blueprints with a paper towel that left them smeared and damaged. "Companies spend millions on R&D. You think you're going to compete with them from your garage?" Their parents had watched the exchange in uncomfortable silence. Her mother, Linda Chen, a nurse who worked double shifts to help pay for Marcus's college tuition, had picked up the damaged blueprints and studied them quietly. Her father, David, an accountant who had immigrated from Taiwan with nothing but determination and a calculator, had cleared his throat diplomatically. "Harper, honey, maybe you should focus on your career. Consulting pays well, and you have good benefits." But it was Marcus's laughter that had cut the deepest. Not just disagreement or concern, actual laughter, as if her dreams were a joke told badly at a party. "Come on, sis. Stick to what you know. Leave the inventing to people who understand business." That night, Harper had locked herself in her childhood bedroom and cried until her eyes were swollen and her chest ached. But somewhere in that flood of tears and humiliation, something had crystallized. A quiet voice in her head had whispered, "He's wrong. You can do this." The next morning, she'd driven to Home Depot and spent $347 on supplies, her entire savings account at the time. The first prototype had been a disaster, a tangle of wires and PVC pipe that looked like a science fair project gone wrong. The second had been marginally better. The third had actually grown something edible. By the 10th iteration, she had a working system that could grow lettuce and herbs reliably. By the 20th, she had incorporated basic automation. By the 40th, she had a product that looked professional and performed flawlessly. "Harper," Lori Greiner's voice brought her back to the present. "You mentioned you've been bootstrapping this. How much of your own money have you invested?" The question hit like a physical blow. Harper had hoped to avoid this topic, but she couldn't lie to the sharks. "I've invested $127,000 of my own money. I cashed out my 401k, maxed out 4 credit cards, and took a second mortgage on my condo." The sharks exchanged glances. This level of personal investment was either inspiring or terrifying, depending on your perspective. "I also quit my consulting job 18 months ago to focus on this full-time. I was making $95,000 a year, but I couldn't build a company while working 60-hour weeks for someone else." Robert Herjavec leaned forward, his expression serious. "Harper, that's a lot of personal risk. What happens if this doesn't work out?" It was a fair question, one that kept Harper awake at 3 a.m. when the doubt crept in. "Mr. Herjavec, 3 years ago, I was slowly killing myself with stress and processed food. I was miserable, unhealthy, and living paycheck to paycheck despite a good salary. If this doesn't work out, I'll have lost money, but I'll have gained something more valuable, the knowledge that I tried to build something meaningful." She paused, her voice growing stronger. "But I don't believe it won't work out. I've seen the look in my customers' eyes when they harvest their first tomato from their own kitchen. I've read emails from parents whose kids are eating vegetables for the first time because they grew them themselves. This isn't just about money. It's about changing how people relate to their food." The studio fell silent, except for the gentle hum of the smart garden pod and the distant whisper of air conditioning. Harper had laid her soul bare, and now she had to wait for judgment. But even as she stood there, vulnerable and exposed under the harsh studio lights, she thought about the text message that had arrived just before her flight to Los Angeles. It was from Mrs. Henderson, a 72-year-old customer in Phoenix who had bought one of her early units. "Harper, dear, I just wanted you to know that my blood pressure has improved significantly since I started eating fresh vegetables from my pod. You gave me my health back. Thank you." Messages like that reminded Harper why she had started this journey, not for revenge against Marcus or validation from the sharks, but because she genuinely believed that fresh, healthy food should be accessible to everyone, regardless of their gardening skills, living space, or location. The smart garden pod hummed quietly on its demonstration table, its LED lights casting a warm, natural glow across the studio floor. Inside its clear growing chambers, perfect lettuce leaves stretched toward the artificial sun, roots drinking from nutrient-rich water in an endless cycle of growth and renewal. It was beautiful in its simplicity, revolutionary in its implications, and Harper knew, regardless of what happened in the next few minutes, that she had created something truly special. Harper's journey to this moment had been carved from a lifetime of being underestimated, particularly by the person whose opinion had once mattered most. Growing up as the younger sibling in the Chen household meant living in Marcus's shadow. He was the academic star, the future business leader, the son who would carry on the family name with honor. Harper was the dreamer, the artist, the one who built elaborate contraptions out of Lego blocks and asked too many questions during family dinners. The morning routine that had sustained her through 3 years of development began at 5:30 a.m. sharp. Harper would wake in her sparse studio apartment, the same tiny space where she had first sketched the smart garden pod concept on that fateful winter evening. The apartment was a study in controlled chaos, every surface covered in prototypes in various stages of completion, notebooks filled with calculations, and empty coffee cups that bore witness to countless all-night design sessions. She would start each day by checking on her test units. 7 different versions of the pod sat arranged along her kitchen counter and windowsill, each running a slightly different configuration. Unit number 1, her first successful prototype, still hummed faithfully despite its jury-rigged appearance. Its mismatched components and exposed wiring told the story of late-night inspiration and desperate improvisation. Unit number 7, sleek and professional, represented 18 months of refinement and the last of her savings account. "Good morning, ladies," she would whisper to the plants, checking their root systems and noting growth patterns in her leather-bound journal. The ritual was both practical and meditative. These plants had become her friends, her proof of concept, her daily reminder that she was creating something that worked. The contradiction that defined Harper's existence was this. She was a woman who couldn't keep a houseplant alive before her invention, yet she had somehow created a system that could nurture dozens of plants with minimal human intervention. The irony wasn't lost on her customers, who often joked in their emails about the black thumb cure she had invented. But Harper knew the real secret. She hadn't learned to grow plants. She had learned to build machines that could grow plants better than humans ever could. The distinction mattered because it spoke to her core philosophy. Technology should amplify human capabilities, not replace human connection. The Smart Garden Pod didn't eliminate the joy of gardening. It made that joy accessible to people who had never experienced it before. Her morning routine continued with a 3-mile run through her neighborhood in San Diego. The pre-dawn streets were empty except for other early risers, joggers, dog walkers, and shift workers heading home. Harper had discovered running during her darkest period, 6 months into the project when she was drowning in debt and self-doubt. The rhythmic pounding of her feet on pavement had become a form of meditation, a way to quiet the inner voice that whispered Marcus's words, "Stick to what you know." The route took her past Balboa Park, where the morning light filtered through eucalyptus trees and created shadows that danced across the path. Sometimes she would stop at the Rose Garden, studying how the groundskeepers maintained hundreds of different varieties. She would take photos with her phone, notes about watering schedules and soil conditions, always looking for insights that might improve her system. One particular morning, about 6 months before her Shark Tank appearance, Harper had encountered Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly woman who was hand-watering the roses with a patience that spoke of decades of practice. "Beautiful morning for the plants," Mrs. Rodriguez had said, noticing Harper's intense study of the irrigation system. "I'm trying to learn how to grow things," Harper had admitted, feeling slightly foolish. "I'm not very good at it." Mrs. Rodriguez had smiled knowingly. "Mija, growing things isn't about having green thumbs. It's about paying attention. You watch, you learn, you adjust. The plants, they tell you what they need if you know how to listen." That conversation had led to a breakthrough in Harper's AI algorithms. She had been focusing on optimizing nutrient delivery and light cycles, but Mrs. Rodriguez's wisdom had inspired her to develop pattern recognition software that could listen to plants through subtle changes in their appearance and growth patterns. The system could now detect stress, disease, or nutrient deficiency days before human eyes would notice anything wrong. After her run, Harper would return home and spend an hour answering customer emails. This was her favorite part of the day because it reminded her why she was destroying her financial future for a dream that her family considered foolish. The emails were windows into lives transformed by fresh food and the pride of growing something yourself. There was Janet from Minnesota who had written, "Harper, I never thought I'd be able to grow anything in my apartment, especially during our brutal winters. But my grandson came over yesterday and ate cherry tomatoes straight from my pod for 10 minutes straight. He kept saying, 'Grandma, you grew these.' It was the best day I've had since my husband passed." There was Michael from Brooklyn, a single father of 2 young daughters. "My girls fight over who gets to harvest vegetables for dinner each night. They've gone from refusing to eat anything green to asking for seconds on salad. My pod has paid for itself just in the money I'm saving on doctor visits." And there was Dr. Sarah Kim, a resident physician who worked 18-hour shifts. "I was living on vending machine food and takeout, feeling terrible all the time. Now I come home to fresh vegetables that I grew myself. It's like having a tiny farm in my kitchen. You've given me back my health and my sanity." Each email was a small victory against Marcus's prediction that nobody would buy her stupid invention. But Harper saved them all. Screenshots organized in folders on her computer, evidence that she was solving real problems for real people. The memory of Marcus's laughter had evolved from a wound into fuel. Initially, it had stung so badly that Harper had avoided family gatherings for months. She couldn't bear the thought of explaining her project again, defending her choices to people who saw her as wasting her life on a fantasy. But as her customer base grew and her technology improved, the sting had transformed into determination. She still remembered the day she had decided to quit her consulting job. Her boss, Janet Morrison, had called her into a glass-walled conference room that overlooked downtown San Diego. Janet was a successful woman in her 50s who had climbed the corporate ladder through sheer force of will and political savvy. She looked at Harper across the polished table with something approaching maternal concern. "Harper, you're one of our most promising consultants. You have a bright future here. This hobby of yours, this gardening thing, it's taking too much of your focus. I need you to choose your career or your side project." Harper had stared out at the city skyline, at the millions of people rushing through their lives, disconnected from their food, their health, their environment. In that moment, she had seen her future stretched out in 2 directions. One path led to a comfortable salary, a 401k, maybe partnership in the firm if she played the game correctly. The other path led into uncertainty, financial ruin, and quite possibly failure. "I choose the side project," she had said quietly. Janet had sighed deeply. "Harper, I hope you know what you're doing. The business world is brutal, especially for young women trying to start tech companies. The failure rate is astronomical." "I know, but I'd rather fail trying to build something meaningful than succeed at something that doesn't matter to me." The conversation with her parents that evening had been even more difficult. She had driven to their house in Claremont, a tidy neighborhood where her father had bought their first American home 30 years earlier. The house smelled like her mother's cooking, ginger, garlic, and the comforting aroma of rice steaming in their old cooker that her mother refused to replace despite its failing gasket. Her parents had listened in silence as she explained her decision. Her father, David, had set down his chopsticks and stared at his plate for a long moment. When he finally looked up, his eyes held the weight of immigrant pragmatism and dreams deferred. "Harper," he had said in his careful English, still tinged with traces of his Taiwanese accent after 3 decades in America, "your mother and I, We came here with nothing. We worked very hard so you and Marcus could have good jobs, secure futures. This consulting job, it's what we dreamed of for our children." Her mother, Linda, had reached across the table and taken Harper's hand. Her fingers were rough from years of hospital work, but her touch was gentle. "We just want you to be safe, honey. Starting a business is so risky. What if it doesn't work?" Harper had expected this reaction, but it still hurt to see the worry in her parents' eyes, to know that her choices were causing them stress after everything they had sacrificed for her education and opportunities. But she had also seen something else in their expressions, a flicker of recognition, perhaps remembering their own leap of faith when they had immigrated to America with 2 young children and a suitcase full of hopes. "Mom, Dad, I know this is scary. It's scary for me too, but I've learned something these past few months. When I was working at the consulting firm, I felt like I was sleepwalking through my life. Every day was the same. Meetings, spreadsheets, helping other companies optimize processes that didn't really matter to me. But when I'm working on the pod, when I'm solving problems and creating something new, I feel alive in a way I never have before." She had pulled out her phone and shown them pictures of her prototype, videos of vegetables growing under LED lights, screenshots of customer emails. "This isn't just a business idea for me. It's a way to help people live healthier lives. It's a way to make fresh food accessible to everyone, not just people with big backyards and gardening experience." Her father had studied the images with the careful attention he brought to tax returns and financial statements. "The technology is impressive," he had admitted. "But Harper, even good ideas fail if they're not properly funded and marketed. Do you have a business plan, market research, competition analysis?" Harper had spent the next 2 hours walking them through every aspect of her business model. She had done her homework: market size, competitive landscape, manufacturing costs, distribution strategies, patent applications. By the end of the evening, her parents' expressions had shifted from worry to cautious interest. "You've thought about this more carefully than I expected," her mother had said. "But promise us you'll be careful. Don't risk everything on this dream." Too late for that, Harper had thought, but she had nodded and promised to be prudent, knowing that she had already crossed the line from prudent to all in. The most painful part of those early months had been the isolation. Harper's social life had withered as her obsession with the pod consumed her evenings and weekends. Friends stopped calling when she repeatedly declined invitations, choosing instead to stay home and work on circuit boards and software code. The few relationships she had attempted had ended badly when boyfriends grew tired of competing with an invention for her attention. Her closest friend, Sarah Martinez, had embraced the project with an enthusiasm that matched Harper's own, spending countless hours helping with the software development and user interface design. On weekends, they would work side by side in Harper's garage, surrounded by the organized chaos of electronic components, plant samples, and empty pizza boxes. "You know what I love about this project?" Sarah had said one evening as they calibrated the nutrient delivery system on prototype number 23. "It's not just about growing vegetables. It's about growing possibilities. Every person who uses one of these is going to discover they can do something they never thought they could do." Sarah understood the deeper mission in a way that even Harper's family didn't. This wasn't about competing with industrial agriculture or replacing traditional gardening. It was about democratizing the ability to grow food, about giving people control over at least one aspect of their nutrition and health in a world that seemed increasingly chaotic and uncertain. The technical challenges had been immense. Harper's background in consulting had given her project management skills and analytical thinking, but she'd had to learn electronics, hydroponics, plant biology, mobile app development, and manufacturing processes from scratch. Her browser history was a testament to her educational journey: how to wire LED drivers, optimal pH levels for tomato plants, iOS app development for beginners, patent application process for inventors. YouTube had become her university. She watched thousands of hours of tutorials on everything from circuit design to injection molding. Her notebook was filled with sketches copied from educational videos, formulas transcribed from online courses, and her own observations about what worked and what didn't. The failures had been spectacular and expensive. Prototype number 8 had caught fire during a software update, filling her garage with acrid smoke and teaching her valuable lessons about power management and thermal protection. Prototype number 12 had developed a catastrophic leak that had flooded her neighbor's garden and required an awkward apology and offered to replace his prized azaleas. Prototype number 17 had suffered what she called the Great Aphid Invasion of 2023, when a contaminated seed pod had introduced pests that had decimated 3 weeks of perfectly healthy plants. Each failure had been followed by a period of despair and self-doubt. Harper would find herself staring at the wreckage of her latest attempt, calculating how much money she had just wasted, wondering if Marcus had been right after all. During the worst moments, she would lie on her garage floor and stare at the ceiling, fighting the urge to call Janet Morrison and beg for her old job back. But then she would think about Mrs. Henderson in Phoenix, growing fresh vegetables in the desert, or Michael's daughters fighting over who got to harvest dinner, or Dr. Kim finally eating something nutritious after 18-hour shifts. These people were counting on her, even if they didn't know it. Their needs were real, their problems were solvable, and Harper had proven that her solution worked. The emotional roller coaster of entrepreneurship had taught her things about herself that she never could have learned in a corporate cubicle. She discovered that she was tougher than she had imagined, more creative under pressure, and capable of learning almost anything if she needed it badly enough. She also learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was the decision to keep moving forward despite being terrified most of the time. Harper's daily routine during the development years had been structured around these emotional cycles. Mornings were for optimism and technical work, when her mind was fresh and problems seemed solvable. Afternoons were for testing and iteration, when she could see immediate results from her efforts. Evenings were the dangerous time, when exhaustion made every obstacle seem insurmountable and every setback feel like proof that she was deluding herself. To combat the evening despair, Harper had developed rituals of hope. She would read customer emails, study her growing plants, and review her progress photos that showed the evolution from that first chaotic prototype to sleek, professional units that looked like they belonged in Apple stores. She would remind herself that every successful inventor had faced similar moments of doubt, that every revolutionary product had seemed impossible until someone made it possible. The memory of Marcus's laughter had become a strange kind of companion during these dark moments. Instead of simply hurting, it had begun to motivate her in ways she hadn't expected. Every successful test, every satisfied customer, every small breakthrough felt like a direct response to his dismissal. She wasn't building the smart garden pod to prove him wrong. She was building it to prove herself right. But the knowledge that she was succeeding where he had predicted failure added a layer of satisfaction to every victory. The path to Shark Tank had been paved with rejections that felt like physical blows, each one confirming Marcus's prediction that the business world would crush her dreams without a second thought. The first major confrontation with reality had come when Harper approached TechStart Ventures, a San Diego-based accelerator that claimed to specialize in helping women-led startups navigate the treacherous waters of technology commercialization.
The meeting had been scheduled for 2 p.m. on a Tuesday in March, 8 months before her Shark Tank appearance. Harper had arrived 30 minutes early, carrying a carefully prepared presentation folder and a demonstration unit that had taken her 3 sleepless nights to perfect. The TechStart offices occupied the 15th floor of a gleaming downtown tower, all glass walls and modern furniture that whispered of serious money and serious business. Rebecca Walsh, the managing partner, was a woman in her 40s with sharp features and a handshake that felt like a challenge. She wore a tailored black suit that probably cost more than Harper's monthly rent, and her office was a shrine to successful investments. Framed photos with entrepreneurs she had funded, awards for Woman Business Leader of the Year, and a bookshelf lined with copies of her memoir, Breaking the Glass Ceiling, A Woman's Guide to Venture Capital. "Harper, thank you for coming in," Rebecca had said, settling behind her desk with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to being the most powerful person in the room. "I've reviewed your application, and I have to say, the technology is intriguing, but I have some concerns about market viability." Harper had launched into her presentation with enthusiasm, demonstrating the pod's features and sharing customer testimonials. She had prepared for every possible objection, armed with market research and competitive analysis that had consumed weeks of her time. But as she spoke, she noticed Rebecca's attention drifting to her phone, her fingers occasionally tapping against her desk in what might have been impatience. "Let me stop you there," Rebecca had interrupted, her voice carrying the authority of someone who was accustomed to cutting through what she perceived as fluff. "Harper, you're obviously passionate about this project, and that's admirable. But passion doesn't pay the bills or generate returns for investors. The home appliance market is incredibly saturated, and consumers are notoriously fickle about kitchen gadgets." She had leaned forward, her expression taking on what Harper would later recognize as the patronizing sympathy that successful people often showed to dreamers. "I see products like this on QVC all the time. They generate a burst of initial interest, maybe sell a few thousand units, and then disappear when the novelty wears off. What makes you think your product will be different?" Harper had felt her carefully prepared confidence begin to crumble, but she had fought to maintain her composure. "Rebecca, this isn't just a kitchen gadget. It's a food production system that addresses real problems: food deserts, nutritional deficiency, environmental sustainability. My customers aren't buying it because it's novel. They're buying it because it solves problems they face every day." Rebecca had smiled the kind of smile that Harper was beginning to recognize in business settings, polite but dismissive. The expression people wore when they were about to deliver bad news wrapped in diplomatic language. "Harper, I appreciate your idealism, but investors need to see clear paths to scale and exit strategies that generate significant returns. Your current business model is essentially selling expensive planters to people who could just as easily grow herbs on their windowsill." The meeting had continued for another 20 minutes, but Harper knew it was over. Rebecca had already decided that the Smart Garden Pod was a nice hobby project, but not a serious business opportunity. As Harper packed up her demonstration unit, Rebecca had delivered the final blow with characteristic directness. "My advice would be to license your technology to an established appliance manufacturer. Let them handle the manufacturing, marketing, and distribution while you collect royalty checks. It's a much safer path than trying to build a company from scratch with no business experience." Harper had left the TechStart offices feeling as if she had been physically beaten. The elevator ride to the parking garage had been a study in controlled humiliation as other entrepreneurs headed to their own pitch meetings, their faces bright with hope and possibility. She had sat in her car for 10 minutes, fighting back tears and wondering if everyone she encountered in the business world would see her as a naive amateur playing in a league far above her capabilities. But the TechStart rejection had been just the beginning. Over the following months, Harper had pitched to 14 different investors, accelerators, and potential partners. The responses had been varied in tone, but shared a common theme. Her product was interesting, but not commercially viable. Her market was too niche. Her competition was too established. Her team was too small. Her experience was too limited. The most painful rejection had come from Kevin Singh, a former colleague from her consulting days who had left to join a venture capital firm. Harper had reached out to Kevin, hoping that their professional relationship would at least guarantee her a fair hearing. They had met at a coffee shop near Balboa Park, the same route Harper ran every morning in her quest to maintain sanity amid the chaos of building a business. Kevin had been friendly but direct. "Harper, I remember you were always the creative one on our team.
always coming up with outside-the-box solutions for client problems. But venture capital isn't consulting. We're not looking for creative solutions to interesting problems. We're looking for massive market opportunities with clear paths to billion-dollar valuations. He had stirred his latte thoughtfully, and Harper could see him choosing his words carefully. The thing is, your Smart Garden pod solves a problem that most people don't realize they have. Americans have been buying vegetables at grocery stores for generations. You're asking them to change fundamental behaviors around food procurement, and behavior change is incredibly difficult to scale. Harper had tried to argue that changing behaviors was exactly what the most successful products did. Smartphones had changed how people communicated. Netflix had changed how people consumed entertainment. Uber had changed how people moved through cities. But Kevin had shaken his head with the weary patience of someone who had heard every possible analogy. Those companies succeeded because they made existing behaviors easier and more convenient. Your product requires people to learn new skills and take on new responsibilities. That's a much harder sell. The conversation had ended with Kevin offering to introduce Harper to some friends in the kitchen appliance space who might be interested in licensing her technology. It was the same suggestion Rebecca Walsh had made, the same escape hatch that every investor seemed to offer when they wanted to let her down gently. But the business rejections were just one front in a war that seemed to be escalating on multiple levels. Harper's family relationships had grown increasingly strained as her financial situation deteriorated and her isolation deepened. The monthly family dinners at her parents' house had become exercises in diplomatic tension, with everyone carefully avoiding the subject of Harper's business while the unspoken questions hung in the air like smoke. Marcus had been the most vocal critic, and his comments had grown sharper as Harper's investment in the project had grown larger. During one particularly tense dinner in June, he had finally voiced what everyone was thinking but had been too polite to say directly. "Harper, it's been over 2 years now," he had said, setting down his chopsticks with the deliberate precision that had always preceded his most cutting observations. "How much money have you lost on this thing? How much longer are you going to pretend this is a viable business?" The question had landed like a slap across the dinner table. Harper's father had cleared his throat uncomfortably, and her mother had busied herself with serving more rice. But no one had contradicted Marcus or come to Harper's defense. "I haven't lost money," Harper had replied, knowing even as she said it that the statement was technically true but emotionally false. "I've invested money. There's a difference." Marcus had laughed, not the cruel laughter of 3 years ago, but the patronizing chuckle of an older brother who was tired of watching his sister make what he considered obvious mistakes. "Harper, when you cash out your retirement account and max out your credit cards for a hobby project, that's not investing, that's gambling." "It's not a hobby project," Harper had shot back, her voice rising despite her efforts to remain calm. "I have real customers. I have recurring revenue. I have a waiting list of almost 3,000 people." 3,000 people who are willing to maybe buy something someday doesn't constitute a business. Do you know how many units you'd have to sell just to break even on what you've already spent? Do you have any idea how much it costs to scale manufacturing, to build distribution channels, to compete with established brands? The argument had continued for another 20 minutes, with Harper defending every aspect of her business model while Marcus systematically dismantled her projections and assumptions. Her parents had sat in increasingly uncomfortable silence, occasionally making diplomatic comments that were designed to lower the temperature, but succeeded only in highlighting their own doubts about Harper's choices. The worst part was that Marcus wasn't entirely wrong. Harper knew the numbers better than anyone, knew exactly how precarious her financial situation had become, knew that she was operating without a safety net in an industry that destroyed most entrepreneurs who tried to enter it. But she also knew things that Marcus couldn't see from his cubicle at the electronics retailer where he worked. The satisfaction in Mrs. Henderson's voice when she called to say her blood pressure had improved. The excitement in Janet from Minnesota's emails when she described her grandson eating fresh tomatoes. the sense of purpose that filled Harper's chest every morning when she checked on her test plants. The family dinner had ended with Harper leaving early, driving home in silence while fighting back tears of frustration and doubt. For the first time since starting the project, she had allowed herself to seriously consider Marcus's suggestion that she cut her losses and return to consulting. Janet Morrison had called twice in the past month, hinting that there might be an opening for Harper if she was interested in coming back to the firm. But the next morning, Harper had received an email that had changed everything. It was from Dr. Patricia Williams, a pediatric nutritionist in Atlanta, who had purchased one of Harper's early units for her personal use. The email was longer than most, written with the clinical precision of someone accustomed to documenting important observations. "Dear Harper," the email had begun, "I wanted to share some data with you that I think you'll find interesting. I've been using your Smart Garden pod for 6 months, and I've documented some remarkable changes in my family's eating habits and health markers. My twin daughters, who previously refused to eat any vegetables, have become enthusiastic consumers of fresh produce since they started helping me harvest from the pod." Dr. Williams had included photos of her daughters, 2 7-year-olds with bright smiles, standing next to the pod while holding handfuls of cherry tomatoes and lettuce leaves. But more importantly, she had included medical data, blood work showing improved vitamin levels, growth charts showing healthier weight trajectories, and behavioral observations documenting increased willingness to try new foods. As a pediatric nutritionist, I see hundreds of families struggling with childhood nutrition. The majority of children in my practice consume fewer than 1 serving of fresh vegetables per day, which contributes to a cascade of health problems that can last a lifetime. Your invention has the potential to address this crisis at the family level in ways that traditional education and intervention programs cannot. The email had concluded with a request that had taken Harper's breath away. "I would like to pilot your system in my practice with 20 families over the next 6 months. I believe we could generate data that would be valuable not only for your business development, but also for public health policy. Would you be interested in collaborating on this research?" Harper had read the email 3 times, each reading confirming that she wasn't misunderstanding the implications. A medical professional wanted to study her invention as a potential intervention for childhood nutrition problems. This wasn't just commercial validation, it was scientific recognition that her work might have broader implications for public health. She had immediately called Sarah Martinez, who screamed with excitement loud enough that Harper had to hold the phone away from her ear. "Harper, do you realize what this means? You're not just selling kitchen appliances, you're creating a medical intervention. This is going to change everything." The collaboration with Dr. Williams had led to other opportunities that Harper could never have anticipated. Through professional networks, word of the pilot study had reached researchers at UC San Diego School of Medicine, who had expressed interest in expanding the research to include elderly populations and food insecurity interventions. Harper had found herself invited to present her work at a conference on urban agriculture, where she had met policymakers, researchers, and entrepreneurs who were working on similar problems from different angles. But success had brought new forms of resistance and conflict. As Harper's profile in the agricultural technology community had grown, she had encountered opposition from unexpected sources. The most significant challenge had come from Green Grow Industries, a large hydroponic equipment manufacturer that apparently viewed Harper's innovations as a competitive threat. The first sign of trouble had been a cease and desist letter from Green Grow's legal team claiming that Harper's nutrient delivery system infringed on patents they held for automated hydroponics controllers. Harper had been forced to hire an intellectual property attorney, draining another $15,000 from her rapidly depleting savings account to defend technology that she had developed independently in her garage. The patent dispute had been particularly galling because Harper's system was fundamentally different from Green Grow's industrial-scale equipment. Her innovation wasn't in the basic concept of automated hydroponics, it was in the AI-driven optimization algorithms and the consumer-friendly interface that made the technology accessible to people with no gardening experience. But patent law was complex and expensive, and Green Grow apparently had deeper pockets and more aggressive lawyers than Harper could afford. The legal battle had dragged on for 4 months, during which Harper had been unable to sell new units or seek additional investment. Potential customers had grown concerned about the patent claims, and several had canceled their pre-orders rather than risk purchasing products that might be subject to legal action. Harper's carefully built momentum had ground to a halt while lawyers traded increasingly hostile letters and technical documents. The resolution had come through an unexpected source. Mr. Patel, her elderly neighbor and unofficial engineering mentor, had connections in the industry that dated back to his decades as a design engineer for various technology companies. When Harper had explained the patent dispute to him during one of their garage sessions, he had listened thoughtfully and then made a few phone calls to former colleagues. "Harper, my dear girl," Mr. Patel had said the following week, "I've spoken with some people who know this business better than either of us. Greengrow's patents are what we call submarine patents, broad claims designed to intimidate competitors rather than protect genuine innovations. Their legal strategy depends on small companies being too scared or too broke to fight back." He had handed Harper a folder containing technical documents and legal precedents that his former colleagues had compiled. "These patents should never have been granted in the first place. The prior art is overwhelming, and several of their claims are obvious extensions of existing technology, but proving that in court would cost you more than your company is worth." The solution Mr. Patel proposed had been elegant in its simplicity. Rather than fighting Greengrowth patents directly, Harper would file for her own patents on the specific innovations that made her system unique: the AI optimization algorithms, the consumer interface design, and the modular growing pod architecture. These patents would create a defensive portfolio that would make it prohibitively expensive for Greengrow to continue their legal harassment. "In engineering, we call this building a moat around your castle," Mr. Patel had explained. "You can't stop them from building castles, but you can make sure they can't attack yours without exposing themselves to counterattack." The patent filing process had consumed another 3 months and $25,000 in legal fees, but it had achieved its intended effect. Greengrow's lawyers had quietly dropped their infringement claims once they realized that pursuing the case would expose their own patents to invalidity challenges. Harper's sales had resumed, and her waiting list had grown even larger during the legal hiatus as word of the dispute had actually generated more interest in her technology. But the patent battle had taught Harper valuable lessons about the darker side of business competition. Large companies with established market positions didn't always compete on the basis of better products or superior customer service. Sometimes they competed by using legal and financial resources to crush smaller competitors before they could gain traction. Harper realized that her success would inevitably attract more attention from established players, and she needed to be prepared for escalating conflicts as her business grew. The most insidious form of resistance had come from within her own extended network. As Harper's profile had grown through the medical research collaboration and industry conferences, she had encountered subtle forms of discrimination and dismissal that were harder to combat than direct legal challenges. At a trade show in Los Angeles, she had overheard 2 male entrepreneurs discussing her presentation in terms that had nothing to do with her technology and everything to do with her appearance and perceived credibility as a young Asian woman in a male-dominated industry. "Nice-looking product," one had said to the other, "but I don't see how some consulting chick from San Diego is going to compete with the big boys in this space. These lifestyle businesses usually flame out once the founder realizes how much work is involved." The comment had stung because it dismissed not only Harper's technology, but also her commitment and capability based on assumptions about her background and gender. She had encountered similar attitudes in investor meetings, where questions about her technical depth and operational experience seemed to carry subtext about whether a woman could really understand the engineering and business challenges involved in scaling a hardware company. The most frustrating aspect of this subtle discrimination was that it was almost impossible to address directly. Harper couldn't accuse investors or competitors of sexism based on the tone of their questions or the assumptions embedded in their comments. She could only respond by working harder, preparing more thoroughly, and demonstrating through results that their assumptions were wrong. Sarah Martinez had become Harper's closest ally in navigating these challenges. As a software engineer in a similarly male-dominated field, Sarah understood the dynamics that Harper was experiencing and provided both technical expertise and emotional support during the most difficult periods. The thing about being underestimated, Sarah had said during one of their late-night working sessions, is that it can actually be a competitive advantage. While they're dismissing you as irrelevant, you're solving problems they don't even realize exist. By the time they figure out what you're doing, you're already too far ahead for them to catch up. Sarah's perspective had proved prophetic. While established companies had been focused on improving industrial hydroponic systems for commercial growers, Harper had been creating an entirely new market category: consumer food production systems for urban environments. Her competitors had been so focused on the existing market that they had missed the opportunity to create a new one. The breakthrough that had ultimately led to her Shark Tank appearance had come through an unexpected channel. Dr. Williams' pilot study had generated data showing significant improvements in childhood nutrition among families using the Smart Garden Pod. The results had been presented at a pediatric nutrition conference where they had attracted the attention of a documentary filmmaker who was working on a project about urban food systems. The filmmaker, Janet Torres, had approached Harper about featuring her story in the documentary. Initially, Harper had been hesitant about the exposure, worried that it might attract more legal challenges or competitive pressure. But Janet had convinced her that the story was bigger than just business success. It was about how individual innovation could address systemic problems in the American food system. The documentary segment had aired on a major streaming platform, generating thousands of inquiries about the Smart Garden Pod and crash-loading Harper's simple website with more traffic than it could handle. More importantly, the documentary had been seen by a Shark Tank producer who had reached out to Harper about appearing on the show. "We're always looking for entrepreneurs who are solving real problems with innovative technology," the producer had explained during their initial phone call. "Your story has all the elements we look for: personal struggle, technological innovation, and the potential for significant market impact." The lead-up to her Shark Tank appearance had been a whirlwind of preparation and anxiety. Harper had spent weeks rehearsing her pitch, refining her financial projections, and preparing for every possible question the sharks might ask. She had also been forced to navigate the complex emotions surrounding her family's reaction to her newfound visibility. Marcus had been uncharacteristically quiet when the documentary had aired, watching Harper's segment in silence while their parents peppered her with questions about the filming process and the response from viewers. But the morning before her flight to Los Angeles for the Shark Tank taping, he had finally addressed the elephant that had been sitting in the room for 3 years.
"Harper, I owe you an apology," he had said during a phone call that had surprised her with its timing and sincerity. "I was wrong about your invention, and I was wrong about your chances of success. I let my own fears and limitations blind me to what you were really doing." The apology had been unexpected and deeply appreciated, but it had also highlighted the complexity of family relationships when one person's success forces others to confront their own choices and assumptions. Marcus's initial dismissal hadn't just been about Harper's business prospects. It had been about his own insecurity and his discomfort with watching his younger sister take risks that he wouldn't have been willing to take himself. The sharks had listened to Harper's pitch with the focused attention of predators evaluating potential prey. But now came the moment of truth. Their questions would determine whether 3 years of struggle and sacrifice would culminate in validation or devastating rejection. The studio lights seemed to intensify as Mark Cuban leaned forward, his expression shifting from casual interest to genuine curiosity. "Harper, you mentioned you've sold 43 units. That's impressive for a bootstrapped operation, but I need to understand your unit economics. What does it cost you to manufacture each pod, and what are you selling them for?" This was the question Harper had been preparing for since she'd first calculated the brutal reality of hardware manufacturing. She took a deep breath, knowing that her answer would either open doors or slam them shut forever. The current manufacturing cost is $340 per unit, Harper began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. I'm selling them for $899, which gives me a gross margin of 62%. But those numbers are based on my current small-scale production. I've received quotes from manufacturers for larger volumes, and at 1,000 units, my cost drops to $280. At 10,000 units, it drops to $195. Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful himself, sat back in his chair with an expression that Harper couldn't read. So you're telling me that right now you're making about $559 per unit sold, but you've only sold 43 units in 3 years. Harper, that's less than 15 units per year. At that rate, this is a hobby, not a business. The criticism stung because it echoed exactly what Marcus said during their last family dinner. But Harper had anticipated this line of attack and had prepared her response carefully. Kevin, you're absolutely right that 43 units doesn't constitute a scalable business, but those sales were generated with zero marketing budget, no sales team, and a website that I built myself using a free template. The real indicator of demand isn't my historical sales. It's my waiting list of 2,847 people who want to pre-order units as soon as I can scale production. She pulled out her phone and opened the app that managed her customer database. More importantly, I've been tracking customer satisfaction metrics, and the results are remarkable. My Net Promoter Score is 89, which puts me in the top 1% of consumer products in any category. The average customer has recommended my product to 3.2 other people, and 94% of my customers say they would definitely purchase again. Barbara Corcoran leaned forward with the sharp attention of a real estate mogul who understood the value of customer loyalty. Harper, those satisfaction numbers are incredible, but I need to understand something. You're asking for $150,000 for 15% of your company. That values your business at $1 million. Based on what metrics? The valuation question was the make or break moment. Harper knew that her current revenue didn't justify a $1 million valuation using traditional multiples, but she also knew that the sharks understood the difference between current performance and future potential. Barbara, you're right that my current revenue doesn't support a $1 million valuation using traditional multiples. But I'm not asking you to invest in where my company is today. I'm asking you to invest in where it's going. My total addressable market is every household in America that buys fresh produce, which is approximately 130 million families spending an average of $2,400 a year on vegetables. She clicked to the next slide on her presentation, revealing market research that had cost her $8,000 to commission from a professional research firm. Even if I capture just 0.1% of that market, 130,000 households, that's $117 million in annual revenue. At 1% market penetration, which is still incredibly conservative for a product this innovative, we're talking about over $1 billion in revenue potential.
Robert Herjevich, who had been quietly observing the exchange, suddenly spoke up. Harper, I like your optimism, but market size doesn't mean anything if you can't acquire customers profitably. What's your customer acquisition strategy, and what does it cost you to acquire each customer? This question struck at the heart of Harper's biggest challenge. She had proven that her product worked and that customers loved it, but she hadn't yet solved the problem of reaching millions of potential customers cost-effectively. Robert, that's exactly why I need investment. My current customers have come to me through word of mouth, press coverage, and organic search. My customer acquisition cost has been essentially zero because I haven't had a marketing budget. But I've been working with a digital marketing consultant to model paid acquisition strategies. Harper pulled out a folder containing detailed spreadsheets and projections. Based on Facebook and Google advertising tests, I can acquire customers for approximately $47 per purchase. With a gross margin of $559 per unit at current volumes, That gives me an 11-to-1 return on advertising spend, which is exceptional for consumer products. The numbers hung in the air like a challenge. Harper watched the sharks' faces, trying to read their reactions to her claims about customer acquisition costs and market potential. She knew that many entrepreneurs inflated their projections and understated their challenges, and the sharks had heard thousands of optimistic pitches that failed to deliver on their promises. Lori Greiner, who had been silent during the financial discussion, suddenly came to life with the intensity that had made her the queen of retail innovation. Harper, I've launched hundreds of products on QVC and in retail stores. Your customer satisfaction numbers are incredible, and your technology is genuinely innovative. But I'm concerned about manufacturing complexity and quality control. How do you ensure that every unit works perfectly when you're scaling to thousands of units? The question revealed Lori's deep understanding of the operational challenges that destroyed many hardware startups. Harper had lived through these challenges during her 3 years of development, and she had learned expensive lessons about the difference between making one perfect prototype and manufacturing thousands of reliable units. Lori, that's been one of my biggest learning curves. My first 10 units had a 40% failure rate because I was essentially hand-assembling them in my garage. But I've spent the last 18 months working with contract manufacturers to develop quality control processes and testing protocols. Harper activated her demonstration unit again, this time focusing on the diagnostic features that most customers never saw. Every pod runs continuous self-diagnostics on all its systems: water flow, nutrient levels, LED performance, temperature control. If any component starts to fail, the system automatically adjusts and sends an alert to the customer's phone with specific instructions for resolution or replacement. She pulled up the manufacturing documentation on her tablet, showing quality control checklists and testing protocols that looked professional and comprehensive. More importantly, I've built relationships with component suppliers who understand the reliability requirements for consumer electronics. Every unit goes through 72 hours of burn-in testing before it ships, and I maintain a full repair and replacement warranty for 2 years. The technical discussions seemed to satisfy Lori's concerns about manufacturing reliability, but Harper could see that the sharks were still evaluating whether her business model was scalable or whether she was simply a talented engineer with an interesting prototype. Robert Cuban had been quiet during the operational discussion, but now he leaned forward with the directness that had made him famous. Harper, I'm impressed by your technology and your passion, but I have a fundamental question about your business model. You're competing against grocery stores, which sell vegetables at commodity prices with massive scale advantages. Why would a rational consumer spend $899 on your device when they can buy vegetables at Walmart for a few dollars per pound? The question struck at the core of Harper's value proposition. She had wrestled with this exact issue during her darkest moments, wondering if she was asking people to pay premium prices for something they could get cheaply and easily through existing channels.
Mark, you're absolutely right that grocery stores can sell vegetables cheaper than I can help people grow them if we're only comparing immediate costs. But my customers aren't making purchasing decisions based only on price per pound. They're solving problems that grocery stores can't solve. Harper's voice grew stronger as she moved into territory where she had absolute confidence, the real-world benefits that her customers experienced every day. Mrs. Henderson in Phoenix is 82 years old and can't drive to the grocery store every few days to buy fresh produce. Her pod provides her with fresh vegetables 365 days a year without leaving her apartment. Michael in Brooklyn is a single father whose daughters refused to eat vegetables until they started growing them themselves. Dr. Kim works 18-hour shifts and comes home to fresh food instead of having to stop at the grocery store when she's exhausted. She paused, looking directly at Mark Cuban. But there's a bigger issue that most people don't think about until they start growing their own food. Grocery store vegetables are optimized for shipping and shelf life, not nutrition or taste. They're picked weeks before they're ripe, shipped thousands of miles, and treated with chemicals to extend their appearance. My customers are eating vegetables that were growing 30 minutes before dinner. The nutritional difference is dramatic, and the taste difference is even more obvious. Barbara Corcoran nodded thoughtfully.
Harper, I can see the value proposition for certain customer segments, but I'm still concerned about market size. How many people are really willing to pay premium prices and learn new behaviors to grow their own vegetables? The market size question had been the central challenge of Harper's entire business model. She was essentially asking people to change fundamental behaviors around food procurement, and behavior change was notoriously difficult to scale in consumer markets. Barbara, I used to worry about the same thing, but then I started tracking broader market trends that suggest people are already changing their behaviors around food. Harper pulled out market research data that she had compiled from multiple sources. Organic food sales have grown 5 to 10% per year for the past decade, even though organic vegetables cost 20 to 40% more than conventional produce. The meal kit industry has grown from $0 to $5 billion in less than 10 years by asking people to pay premium prices for convenient access to fresh ingredients. She clicked to the next data slide, showing demographic and psychographic profiles of her target market. But more importantly, my target market isn't everyone. It's the 40 million American households that already spend premium prices on organic food, shop at Whole Foods, or subscribe to meal kit services. These are people who have demonstrated that they're willing to pay more for better food experiences. Kevin O'Leary had been scribbling notes throughout the market discussion, and now he looked up with the expression of someone who had been doing mental calculations. Harper, let's talk about the elephant in the room. You've invested $127,000 of your own money in this business. You've quit a $95,000 per year job. You're asking us to invest $150,000. What happens if this doesn't work? What's your exit strategy if the market doesn't develop the way you're projecting? The question was both practical and personal. Kevin was asking about business contingency planning, but he was also asking whether Harper had risked everything on a dream that might not be sustainable. Kevin, I appreciate the directness of that question because it's something I think about every day. You're right that I've invested everything I have in this business, and that's a risk that keeps me awake at night. But I've also built something that has real value even if the mass market doesn't develop the way I'm projecting. Harper's response was measured and honest, reflecting the emotional journey she had traveled over 3 years of uncertainty. At minimum, I have proven technology that solves real problems for a niche market. My intellectual property portfolio includes 3 pending patents on innovations that could be licensed to larger companies. My customer base includes medical professionals who are using my product in clinical settings. Even in a worst-case scenario, there are multiple ways to extract value from what I've built. She paused, her voice taking on a more personal tone. But more importantly, I've learned that the real risk isn't financial failure. It's living with the regret of not trying. 3 years ago, I was miserable in a job that paid well but didn't matter to me. Today, I'm stressed about money, but I wake up every morning excited about the work I'm doing and the problems I'm solving. Even if this business fails, I've gained skills, relationships, and experiences that will serve me for the rest of my life.
The studio fell silent as the sharks processed Harper's combination of business analysis and personal reflection. She had answered their questions about manufacturing, marketing, and market size, but she had also revealed something deeper about her motivations and her resilience in the face of uncertainty. Robert Herjavec broke the silence with a question that surprised Harper with its specificity. Harper, you mentioned that you're working with medical professionals who are using your product in clinical settings. Can you tell me more about that? Because if this is a medical device, rather than just a consumer appliance, that changes the entire business model. The medical application question opened a door that Harper hadn't expected to walk through during her Shark Tank pitch. Dr. Williams' pediatric nutrition study had led to opportunities that went far beyond consumer sales. But Harper had been focused on the direct-to-consumer market in her preparation for the show. Robert, that's actually where some of the most exciting developments are happening. Dr. Patricia Williams, a pediatric nutritionist in Atlanta, has been conducting a pilot study with 20 families using my product to address childhood nutrition deficiencies. The preliminary results show significant improvements in vegetable consumption and measurable health outcomes. Harper pulled out her phone and showed before and after photos from the study. Children who had previously refused to eat vegetables were now enthusiastically consuming fresh produce they had grown themselves.
But it goes beyond pediatric applications. I've been contacted by researchers who want to study the pod as an intervention for elderly nutrition, food insecurity in urban areas, and even therapeutic applications for patients with eating disorders. The revelation seemed to electrify the sharks. Barbara Corcoran leaned forward with obvious interest. Harper, if you have clinical data showing health improvements, that's not just a business opportunity. That's a potential healthcare solution. Have you considered pursuing FDA approval or working with insurance companies that might cover the cost? The question opened up possibilities that Harper had been researching but hadn't yet fully explored. Barbara, I've had preliminary discussions with regulatory consultants about the pathway for medical device approval. The process is complex and expensive, but the potential market is enormous. If insurance companies covered even a portion of the cost, it would make the product accessible to millions of families who can't afford the current price point. Mark Cuban had been silent during the medical device discussion, but now he spoke with the intensity that signaled genuine interest. Harper, this is fascinating, but I need to understand your priorities. Are you building a consumer electronics company or a medical device company? Because those are very different businesses with very different requirements for capital, regulation, and expertise. The question forced Harper to articulate something that she had been struggling with internally, the tension between the immediate opportunity in the consumer market and the potentially larger opportunity in healthcare applications. Mark, I think the answer is both, but in sequence. The consumer market allows me to scale manufacturing, refine the technology, and build a sustainable business foundation. The medical applications require clinical trials, regulatory approval, and partnerships with healthcare systems that could take years to develop. My strategy is to succeed in the consumer market first, then use that success to fund and support the medical device pathway. The strategic framework seemed to resonate with the sharks, who understood the challenge of pursuing multiple market opportunities simultaneously. Harper could see that she had successfully navigated their initial skepticism about market size and manufacturing complexity, but she still didn't know whether any of them would be willing to invest in her vision. Lori Greiner had been quiet during the medical device discussion, but now she spoke with the decisiveness that had made her one of the most successful product developers in retail history. Harper, I've been in this business for 20 years, and I rarely see products that combine genuine innovation with proven customer demand. Your technology is impressive.
Customer satisfaction metrics are exceptional, and your vision for expanding into medical applications is compelling. But I'm concerned about the complexity of scaling a hardware business with the capital requirements you're proposing. $150,000 might get you to the next level, but it won't get you to profitability. You're going to need multiple rounds of funding, and each round will dilute your ownership. The criticism was fair and reflected the brutal reality of hardware startups. Harper knew that $150,000 would solve her immediate cash flow problems and allow her to scale production, but it wouldn't fund the marketing budget or additional product development needed to build a sustainable business. Lori, you're absolutely right about the capital requirements. This $150,000 round would fund inventory and initial marketing to prove scalable customer acquisition. Based on my projections, I'd need another $500,000 to $1 million in Series A funding to really scale the business. But I'd rather raise money in stages based on proven milestones than take on more investment than I need right now. The funding strategy seemed to satisfy Lori's concerns about capital efficiency, but Harper could see that the sharks were moving toward decision mode. The questions were becoming more specific, more tactical, and more focused on whether they wanted to partner with her rather than her business was viable. Kevin O'Leary had been silent for several minutes, but now he leaned forward with the predatory smile that meant he was ready to make an offer or deliver a devastating critique. Harper, I'm going to be direct with you. I think your product is interesting, your technology is solid, and your passion is admirable, but I don't invest in businesses. I invest in money-making machines. Your current financial performance doesn't justify your valuation, and your path to profitability is unclear. Harper's heart sunk as she recognized the tone that meant Kevin was about to deliver a rejection. But then his expression shifted slightly, and she realized he wasn't finished. However, I see potential for licensing deals and strategic partnerships that could generate revenue without the complexity of scaling manufacturing and marketing.
I'm willing to make you an offer, but it's going to be different from what you're asking for. Kevin O'Leary's offer hung in the air, like a challenge and an opportunity, wrapped together in his trademark blend of ruthless pragmatism and unexpected generosity. Harper felt her pulse quicken as she waited to hear the terms that could either validate 3 years of struggle or force her to choose between her vision and financial security. Harper, here's what I'm thinking. Kevin continued, his voice carrying the measured cadence of someone who had made hundreds of similar calculations. I'll give you $150,000, but I want 25% of your company, not 15%. More importantly, I want to restructure your business model around licensing and partnerships rather than direct manufacturing and sales. The offer was both more and less than Harper had hoped for. The money would solve her immediate cash flow problems, but the equity stake was significantly higher than she had planned, and the business model change would represent a fundamental shift in her strategy. Kevin, I appreciate the offer, but I'm concerned about the licensing approach, Harper replied, her voice steady despite the emotional tsunami crashing through her mind. I've had multiple companies approach me about licensing deals, and they all want to fundamentally change the product to fit their existing manufacturing and distribution capabilities. I'm worried that licensing would compromise the innovation that makes my product special. Kevin nodded approvingly, as if Harper had passed some kind of test by pushing back on his proposal. Harper, that's exactly the kind of response I want to hear from an entrepreneur. You're right to be concerned about maintaining control over your innovation. But consider this. Licensing deals with the right partners could get your technology into millions of households without requiring you to build manufacturing and distribution infrastructure from scratch. Before Harper could respond, Barbara Corcoran jumped into the conversation with the intensity that had made her a real estate mogul and successful investor. Kevin, I think you're underestimating the value of Harper's direct customer relationships and her brand positioning in the premium market. This isn't just about technology, it's about the entire customer experience and the emotional connection people have with growing their own food.
Barbara turned to address Harper directly. Harper, I think your current business model is exactly right for building a sustainable, high-margin business. Premium customers are willing to pay premium prices for products that solve real problems and deliver exceptional experiences. Your Net Promoter Score of 89 proves that you've created something customers genuinely love. Harper felt a surge of hope as Barbara continued. I'm willing to make you an offer that respects your vision and your valuation. I'll give you $150,000 for 20% of your company, and I'll bring something that Kevin can't. My expertise in building premium consumer brands, and my relationships with major retailers. The competing offers created exactly the kind of dynamic that made Shark Tank compelling television. But Harper felt the weight of the decisions settling on her shoulders like a physical presence. She had dreamed of this moment for 3 years, but she hadn't anticipated how emotionally complex it would be to choose between different visions of her company's future. Barbara, I'm incredibly honored by your offer, Harper began, her mind racing through the implications of each proposal. Your experience in premium retail and brand building is exactly what I need to scale this business successfully. But before I respond to either offer, I'd like to hear from the other sharks. Mark Cuban had been observing the exchange with the focused attention of someone who understood that the real negotiation was just beginning. Harper, both Kevin and Barbara have made solid offers that reflect different approaches to scaling your business. But I think you're all missing the biggest opportunity here. He leaned forward with the intensity that had made him one of the most successful entrepreneurs and investors in America. This isn't just about selling kitchen appliances or licensing technology. You've created a platform that could revolutionize how people think about food production, health, and sustainability. The medical applications you mentioned could be worth billions if you execute them correctly. Harper felt her breath catch as Mark continued. I'm willing to give you $150,000 for 15% of your company, exactly what you asked for, but with one condition. I want you to pivot your strategy to focus on the medical and institutional markets first. Hospitals, senior living facilities, schools, rehabilitation centers, these are customers who will pay premium prices for proven health outcomes. The offer was exactly what Harper had originally proposed in terms of valuation, but the strategic pivot represented a fundamental change in her business model that would delay her consumer market ambitions indefinitely. Before Harper could process Mark's offer completely, Robert Herjavec spoke up with the cybersecurity executive's attention to operational detail that had made him successful in multiple industries. Harper, I've been watching this negotiation, and I think everyone is overcomplicating your decision. You have a proven product with excellent customer satisfaction metrics and clear demand. What you need isn't a strategic pivot. You need operational expertise and capital to scale efficiently. Robert's voice carried the confidence of someone who had built and scaled multiple technology companies. I'll match Barbara's offer, $150,000 for 20% of your company, but I'll bring something different to the table. My background in technology operations and supply chain management will help you scale manufacturing without compromising quality. More importantly, my connections in the technology industry can help you develop strategic partnerships that could accelerate your growth significantly. 4 offers from 4 sharks, each reflecting a different vision of how Harper's business could develop. The studio lights seemed to intensify as Harper realized that she had achieved something that most entrepreneurs could only dream of: multiple offers from successful investors who believed in her vision and were willing to bet their money on her success. But Lori Greiner, who had been quietly observing the negotiation, suddenly spoke up with the decisiveness that had made her the queen of retail innovation. Harper, I've been listening to all these offers, and I think my colleagues are making this more complicated than it needs to be. You've built an exceptional product with proven demand. What you need is someone who understands how to take innovative products from small scale to mass market success.
Lori's voice carried the authority of someone who'd launched hundreds of successful products and understood the consumer market better than anyone else in the room. I'm willing to give you $200,000 for 20% of your company, but more importantly, I'm offering you something that none of the other sharks can: a guaranteed path to retail distribution through QVC and major retail partners. I can have your product in front of millions of customers within 6 months. The increased dollar amount and the promise of immediate access to mass distribution channels created a 5th option that Harper hadn't anticipated. She found herself standing in the center of a bidding war between 5 of the most successful business people in America, each offering not just money, but their expertise, connections, and vision for her company's future. Harper closed her eyes for a moment, trying to process the surreal nature of her situation. 3 years earlier, Marcus had laughed at her stupid invention in their parents' kitchen. 18 months earlier, she had been rejected by 14 different investors who couldn't see the potential in her technology. 6 months earlier, she had been fighting patent lawsuits and questioning whether she should abandon her dream and return to consulting. Now she was standing in front of 5 millionaires who were competing to invest in her vision, offering not just validation, but pathways to success that exceeded her wildest projections. But the decision wasn't just about money or even about business strategy. It was about choosing a partner who understood her values and could help her build the company she wanted to create, not just the company that would generate the highest returns. I need a moment to think about these offers, Harper said, her voice surprisingly steady, given the emotional intensity of the situation. Each of you is offering something different and valuable, and I want to make sure I choose the partnership that's right for my company's long-term success. The sharks nodded approvingly. Harper's request for time to consider the offers demonstrated exactly the kind of thoughtful decision-making that successful entrepreneurs needed to develop. Harper looked at her smart garden pod, still humming quietly on its demonstration table, its LED lights nurturing perfect vegetables in the harsh studio environment. The device represented thousands of hours of work, hundreds of failures, dozens of breakthroughs, and the dreams of customers who had trusted her with their money and their hopes for healthier lives. Kevin, Harper began, addressing each shark in turn. I appreciate your offer and your expertise in licensing and partnerships, but I believe that the direct customer relationship is essential to building a sustainable brand in this market. Licensing deals might generate short-term revenue, but they would compromise the innovation and customer experience that make my product special.
Kevin nodded with the grace of a seasoned negotiator who understood that not every deal was meant to be. Harper, I respect your decision. Sometimes the best partnerships are the ones that don't happen when the strategic fit isn't right. Harper turned to Mark Cuban. Mark, your offer to focus on medical and institutional markets is compelling, and I believe that's where some of the biggest long-term opportunities exist. But I'm not ready to pivot away from the consumer market that got me to this point. I want to prove success in the consumer space first, then use that foundation to expand into medical applications. Mark smiled with the understanding of someone who had made similar strategic decisions in his own entrepreneurial journey. Harper, that's smart thinking. Build your foundation first, then expand from a position of strength. Harper looked at Robert Herjavec. Robert, your operational expertise and technology connections would be incredibly valuable as I scale manufacturing and develop new products. But I think my most immediate need is market access and retail expertise rather than operational optimization. Robert nodded approvingly. Harper, knowing what you need and when you need it is one of the most important skills an entrepreneur can develop. You're making the right choice for your current stage of growth.
Barbara, your offer to maintain my valuation while bringing premium retail expertise is exactly aligned with my vision for building a high-end brand in this space. But Lori, your offer of additional capital and immediate access to mass distribution channels could accelerate my growth timeline significantly. Harper paused, looking directly at Lori Greiner. Lori, I have watched your success with countless products, and I know that your ability to identify and scale innovative consumer products is unmatched in the industry. I accept your offer, $200,000 for 20% of my company. The studio erupted in applause as Lori stood up with a massive smile and walked over to embrace Harper. Harper, I am so excited to work with you. We're going to make your smart garden pod a household name. As the cameras captured the moment of celebration, Harper felt a complex mixture of emotions washing over her. Relief that 3 years of struggle had culminated in validation and partnership with one of the most successful product developers in retail history. Excitement about the possibilities that Lori's expertise and connections would create for scaling her business. Pride that she had built something valuable enough to attract multiple offers from successful investors. But underneath those positive emotions, Harper also felt a profound sense of completion. She had proven to herself, to her family, and to everyone who had doubted her that innovation and persistence could overcome skepticism and rejection. The girl who couldn't keep a basil plant alive had created a product that was helping thousands of people grow fresh food in their own homes. The aftermath of the Shark Tank taping was a whirlwind of media interviews, customer inquiries, and operational planning. Harper's website crashed within hours of the episode airing as tens of thousands of potential customers tried to learn more about the Smart Garden Pod. Her email inbox filled with messages from customers, competitors, journalists, and potential partners who had seen her story and wanted to connect. But the message that meant the most to Harper arrived the day after her episode aired. It was a simple text from Marcus. Harper, I watched your show last night. I have never been more proud to be your brother. I'm sorry it took me so long to believe in your vision. Congratulations on proving everyone wrong, especially me. 6 months after her Shark Tank appearance, Harper's partnership with Lori had transformed her business beyond her wildest projections. The Smart Garden Pod was being sold through QVC, Target, Williams-Sonoma, and dozens of specialty retailers. Monthly sales had grown from dozens of units to thousands, and her waiting list had expanded to over 15,000 customers. But more importantly, Harper had maintained the values and vision that had driven her to start the company. Her customer satisfaction metrics remained exceptional, her product quality had actually improved through the scaling process, and she continued to receive emails from customers whose lives had been changed by the ability to grow fresh food in their own homes. Dr. Williams's pediatric nutrition study had been expanded to include 200 families across multiple cities, and the results are attracting attention from public health officials and policymakers.
Harper had begun working with researchers at several universities to explore applications for elderly nutrition, food insecurity interventions, and therapeutic programs for patients with eating disorders. The patent portfolio that Mr. Patel had helped her develop had proven invaluable as larger companies had approached her for licensing deals and strategic partnerships. But rather than licensing her core technology, Harper had used her intellectual property as a defensive moat that allowed her to compete with established players while protecting her innovations. Sarah Martinez had joined the company full-time as Chief Technology Officer, leading the development of new features and product variations that expanded the Smart Garden Pod's capabilities. They had introduced models optimized for different living spaces, growing different types of plants, and serving different customer segments. Harper's parents had become her biggest champions, proudly telling their friends about their daughter's success and displaying promotional materials for the Smart Garden Pod in their living room. Her father had even started using his accounting expertise to help Harper understand the financial implications of her rapid growth. But perhaps the most meaningful validation had come from Harper's original customers, the early adopters who had trusted her with their money when she was just an unknown entrepreneur with a crazy idea. Mrs. Henderson in Phoenix had become something of a celebrity in her senior living community, teaching other residents how to use their smart garden pods and advocating for the health benefits of fresh vegetables. Michael's daughters in Brooklyn had started a small business selling extra produce from their pod to neighbors, learning entrepreneurship from their father's example of supporting innovative companies. 3 years later, Harper stood in the gleaming headquarters of Fresh Growth Technologies, watching through floor-to-ceiling windows as her manufacturing team assembled the latest generation of smart garden pods in a facility that had once seemed like an impossible dream. The building hummed with purposeful activity, engineers refining new product designs, customer service representatives helping families optimize their growing experiences, and supply chain specialists coordinating with manufacturers across 3 continents. The company had grown from Harper's garage laboratory to a 200-employee operation generating over $50 million in annual revenue. But the mission remained unchanged, making fresh, healthy food accessible to everyone, regardless of their living space, gardening experience, or geographic location. What had started as a desperate attempt to solve her own problems had evolved into a platform that was transforming how millions of people thought about food production and nutrition. Harper's morning routine now began in her office overlooking San Diego Bay, where she would review overnight sales data, customer feedback, and operational metrics that would have been fantasy numbers during her bootstrap years. The Smart Garden Pod had achieved what few consumer products ever accomplish: sustained growth across multiple market segments while maintaining exceptional customer satisfaction and expanding into adjacent opportunities. But the numbers, impressive as they were, told only part of the story. The real impact was measured in emails from customers whose lives had been changed by the ability to grow their own food. There was Janet from Minnesota, whose grandson was now 8 years old and still fought with his siblings over who got to harvest vegetables for dinner. Mrs. Henderson in Phoenix had become the unofficial ambassador of urban agriculture in her retirement community, and her blood pressure had remained stable for 3 years running. Dr. Kim had been promoted to Chief of Emergency Medicine and credited her homegrown vegetables with helping her maintain the energy and focus needed for her demanding role. The medical applications that had seemed like distant possibilities during Harper's Shark Tank appearance had evolved into a significant revenue stream and impact opportunity. Dr. Williams' pediatric nutrition research had expanded into a multi-site clinical trial funded by the National Institutes of Health, with preliminary results showing measurable improvements in childhood nutrition outcomes across diverse population groups. The study had attracted attention from pediatricians, public health officials, and policymakers who were searching for scalable interventions to address the childhood obesity epidemic. Harper had established a medical division within Fresh Growth Technologies, led by Dr. Amanda Foster, a former CDC researcher who specialized in nutrition interventions in health behavior change.
The medical smart garden pods were modified versions of the consumer product designed specifically for use in hospitals, rehabilitation centers, senior living facilities, and therapeutic programs. The results had exceeded everyone's expectations. Senior living facilities reported that residents who participated in growing programs showed improved cognitive function, better nutritional intake, and higher levels of social engagement. Rehabilitation centers found that patients recovering from strokes or traumatic injuries responded positively to the goal-oriented, rewarding activities involved in tending growing plants. Children's hospitals had integrated the devices into their therapeutic programs, giving young patients and their families positive activities that created hope and normalcy during difficult treatments. The success in medical markets had opened doors to institutional applications that Harper had never anticipated. The Department of Defense had purchased thousands of units from military bases in remote locations where fresh produce was difficult to obtain and expensive to transport. NASA had funded research into how Harper's technology could be adapted for space exploration missions, where crew members needed reliable access to fresh food during long-duration flights.
But perhaps the most meaningful expansion had been into underserved communities where fresh produce was either unavailable or prohibitively expensive. Harper had partnered with community organizations, food banks, and public health agencies to develop subsidized programs that made the Smart Garden Pod accessible to low-income families. The Fresh Start initiative provided devices, training, and ongoing support to families in food deserts, giving them the ability to grow fresh vegetables regardless of their neighborhood's retail infrastructure. The program had faced skepticism from critics who argued that high-tech solutions were inappropriate for communities dealing with basic economic challenges. But the results spoke for themselves. Families who participated in Fresh Start showed improved dietary patterns, reduced grocery expenses, and higher levels of engagement with their children's nutrition education. More importantly, many participants became advocates for urban agriculture in their communities, teaching neighbors and friends how to grow food in small spaces. Sarah Martinez had been promoted to Chief Innovation Officer, leading a team of engineers and designers who were developing the next generation of home food production systems. The Smart Garden Pod had spawned an entire product line: compact units for apartments, larger systems for families, specialized models for herbs and microgreens, and even outdoor versions for people with patio space. But Sarah's most ambitious project was the development of AI-powered growing systems that could learn from millions of users worldwide, continuously optimizing growing conditions based on environmental factors, user preferences, and crop performance. The Growing Intelligence platform collected anonymized data from thousands of devices, creating insights that helped every user achieve better results while contributing to a global understanding of how to optimize food production in diverse environments. The technology had evolved far beyond Harper's original vision of automated hydroponics. Modern smart garden pods incorporated machine learning algorithms that could predict optimal planting schedules based on local weather patterns, recommend crop varieties based on family dietary preferences, and even coordinate with smart home systems to optimize energy consumption and environmental conditions. Harper's relationship with her family had been transformed by her success, but not in the ways she had expected. Marcus had left his retail job and joined Fresh Growth Technologies as Director of Operations, bringing his business degree and natural organizational skills to help manage the company's rapid growth. The brother who had once laughed at her stupid invention had become one of her most trusted advisors and her strongest advocate within the family. "You know what I learned from watching you build this company?" Marcus had said during a recent family dinner. "The difference between successful people and everyone else isn't intelligence or luck. It's the willingness to keep working on something even when everyone tells you it's impossible. I spent years playing it safe and wondering why my life felt meaningless. You took enormous risks and created something that matters." Their parents had watched Harper's transformation from struggling entrepreneur to successful CEO with a mixture of pride and amazement. David Chen had become the company's unofficial financial advisor, using his accounting expertise to help Harper navigate the complexities of rapid growth, investor relations, and international expansion. Linda Chen had taken early retirement from nursing to help manage the Fresh Start program, applying her healthcare background and natural empathy to help families in underserved communities learn to grow their own food.
Harper, when you quit your consulting job, your father and I were terrified. We came to America so our children could have secure, comfortable lives. The idea of you risking everything on an untested invention seemed like throwing away everything we had worked for. Her voice had softened with emotion as she continued. But watching you succeed has taught us something about the American dream that we didn't understand before. Security isn't about having a safe job. It's about having the skills and confidence to create value for other people. You didn't just build a successful business, you proved that innovation and persistence can overcome any obstacle. The partnership with Lori Greiner had exceeded both of their expectations. Lori's retail expertise and QVC platform had provided the market access that Harper needed to scale rapidly. But more importantly, Lori had become a mentor who helped Harper navigate the challenges of leadership, team building, and strategic decision-making that came with rapid growth.
Harper, when I first saw your product on Shark Tank, I knew you had created something special, Lori had said during their most recent board meeting. But what impressed me most wasn't your technology. It was your clarity about your mission and your refusal to compromise your values for short-term gains. That's what separates successful entrepreneurs from people who just want to make money. Under Lori's guidance, Harper had learned to balance growth with sustainability, ensuring that the company's expansion didn't compromise the customer experience or product quality that had made the Smart Garden Pod successful. They had turned down numerous acquisition offers from larger companies, choosing instead to maintain independence and control over the company's strategic direction. The financial success had been gratifying, but Harper had discovered that wealth brought responsibilities that she hadn't anticipated. She had established the Fresh Growth Foundation, which funded research into sustainable agriculture, provided grants to community organizations working on food access issues, and supported entrepreneurship programs for women and underrepresented minorities in technology. The foundation's signature program, Seeds of Innovation, provided funding, mentorship, and resources to entrepreneurs who were developing solutions to food-related challenges. Harper had learned that her success created opportunities to help other innovators navigate the same obstacles that had nearly destroyed her own dreams. But the most rewarding aspect of her success had been the letters and emails from customers whose lives had been changed by the ability to grow their own food. These messages arrived daily, each one a reminder of why she had started the company and validation that her work was creating meaningful impact in the world. There was the single mother in Detroit who had used her Smart Garden Pod to teach her children about nutrition and responsibility while reducing her grocery expenses. The elderly widower in rural Montana who had found purpose in community by sharing vegetables from his pod with neighbors. The teenager with autism in suburban Phoenix who had discovered a talent for growing plants that had led to increased confidence and social engagement. Each story was unique, but they shared common themes. People discovering capabilities they didn't know they had, families spending more time together around food preparation and sharing, individuals taking control of their health and nutrition in ways that created ripple effects throughout their lives. 5 years after her Shark Tank appearance, Harper was invited to return to the show as a guest expert, helping other entrepreneurs navigate the challenges of scaling hardware businesses and building sustainable brands. Standing in the same studio where she had once pleaded for validation and investment, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from desperate entrepreneur to industry leader. The most important lesson I learned, Harper told the current batch of entrepreneurs during a behind-the-scenes interview, is that innovation isn't just about creating new technology. It's about understanding human needs so deeply that you can develop solutions people didn't even know they wanted. She paused, looking at the young entrepreneurs who reminded her of herself during those terrifying early days. Everyone told me that my market was too small, that people wouldn't change their behaviors, that I was competing against grocery stores with impossible economics. But they were all thinking about the problem wrong. I wasn't competing with grocery stores. I was solving problems that grocery stores couldn't solve. Fresh food whenever you want it, grown in your own home with no pesticides or chemicals, involving your kids in the process, and creating a sense of connection to your food that most people have never experienced.
The current entrepreneurs nodded with the understanding of people who had heard similar criticisms and doubts about their own innovations. The other lesson, Harper continued, is that persistence isn't just about working hard, it's about learning fast. Every rejection taught me something about my business model, my market, or my presentation. Every failed prototype taught me something about engineering, manufacturing, or user experience. Every difficult customer taught me something about product development or customer service.
She smiled, remembering her own desperate moments when failure had seemed inevitable and return to consulting had looked like the only sensible option. The difference between entrepreneurs who succeed and those who fail isn't intelligence or luck. It's the ability to treat every setback as data rather than defeat. When investors rejected me, I didn't just feel bad about it. I analyzed their objections and used that feedback to improve my pitch and my business model. 7 years after her Shark Tank appearance, Harper was featured on the cover of Forbes magazine as one of America's most innovative entrepreneurs, with the Smart Garden Pod highlighted as a product that had created an entirely new market category. But the achievement that meant the most to her was much more personal and immediate. Her nephew, Marcus's 5-year-old son David, had spent the afternoon at Harper's house helping her harvest vegetables from her personal Smart Garden Pod, the same model that had evolved from her original devastating attempt to grow basil in her studio apartment. David's small hands had carefully picked cherry tomatoes and lettuce leaves, his face bright with the same excitement that Harper read about in customer emails every day. "Aunt Harper," David had asked with the serious curiosity of a child discovering the world, "how do the plants know how to grow in your machine?" Harper had knelt down to his eye level, looking into the face that reminded her so much of Marcus at that age, and had tried to explain the complex interaction of artificial intelligence, hydroponic systems, and automated environmental control in terms that a 5-year-old could understand. "Well, David, it's kind of like the machine is a very smart gardener that never gets tired and never forgets to take care of the plants. It watches them very carefully and gives them exactly what they need, the right amount of water, the right kind of light, and the right food for plants, so they can grow big and strong and delicious." David had nodded thoughtfully, accepting the simplified explanation while clearly processing the implications. "So everyone could have fresh vegetables all the time, even if they don't have a yard?" "That's exactly right," Harper had replied, feeling the same sense of purpose that had sustained her through 3 years of rejection and doubt. "Everyone deserves access to fresh, healthy food, no matter where they live or how much money they have or whether they know how to garden. That's why I invented this machine, to make sure that everyone could grow their own vegetables." As she watched David carefully place the harvested vegetables in a basket, Harper reflected on the journey that had brought her from that devastating moment in her parents' kitchen when Marcus had laughed at her stupid invention. The path from garage laboratory to global impact had been longer and more challenging than she could have imagined, filled with moments when failure seemed inevitable and success felt impossible. But every customer email, every improved health outcome, every child who discovered the joy of growing their own food, every family that gained control over their nutrition and food security, all of it validated the decisions she had made to risk everything on a vision that others couldn't see. 10 years after her Shark Tank appearance, Harper stood before a packed auditorium at the World Food Innovation Summit in Geneva, Switzerland, delivering the keynote address on technology solutions for global food security. The Smart Garden Pod had evolved into a platform that was being used in over 40 countries, adapted for different climates, crops, and cultural preferences, but maintaining the core mission of making fresh food accessible to everyone. The company had grown to over 1,000 employees across multiple countries, with manufacturing facilities on 3 continents and research partnerships with universities and agricultural institutions worldwide. Fresh Growth Technologies had become more than a product company. It was a global platform for food innovation and education. But the achievement that meant the most to her was much more personal and immediate. Every innovation, every expansion, every strategic decision had been driven by the same simple goal: helping people live healthier lives by growing their own food.
When I started this journey, Harper told the international audience, My brother laughed at my stupid invention and told me that nobody would ever buy such a thing. He was wrong about the market opportunity, but he was right about one thing. What I was proposing was fundamentally different from how people had thought about food for generations. She clicked to a slide showing global adoption statistics. Millions of devices sold, hundreds of thousands of families growing their own food, measurable improvements in nutrition and health outcomes across diverse populations and geographic regions. The lesson I've learned is that innovation isn't about predicting the future, it's about creating the future we want to live in. 10 years ago, the idea that people would grow vegetables in their kitchens seemed ridiculous to most experts. Today, it's normal for millions of families around the world. Tomorrow, I believe it will be as common as microwave ovens or coffee makers. Harper's voice grew stronger as she moved toward her conclusion. But the real impact of this technology isn't measured in units sold or revenue generated. It's measured in lives changed. Children who learn to love vegetables because they grew them themselves. Elderly people who maintain their independence and health by growing their own fresh food. Families who spend time together around planting, tending, and harvesting. Communities that become more resilient and self-sufficient. She paused, looking directly at the audience with the confidence that came from a decade of proving skeptics wrong. When people tell you that your idea is stupid, that nobody will buy it, that you're competing against impossible odds, remember that every innovation that changed the world was once dismissed as impossible or unnecessary. The difference between ideas that die and ideas that transform industries is persistence, learning, and an unwavering focus on solving real problems for real people. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just recognition of Harper's business success, it was acknowledgement of her contribution to a global movement toward food security, health, and sustainability. As she left the stage, Harper received dozens of business cards, speaking requests, and collaboration proposals from organizations around the world. But the message that waited for her on her phone was the one that mattered most. It was a photo from Marcus showing his son David, now 15 years old, teaching his younger sister how to harvest vegetables from their family's latest generation smart garden pod. The caption read, "Harper, David is talking about studying agricultural engineering in college so he can help you solve world hunger. I think our family is pretty good at this innovation thing after all." Harper smiled, remembering the scared young woman who had quit her consulting job and risked everything on a dream that everyone told her was impossible. That woman had been driven by desperation and hope in equal measure, sustained by the belief that fresh food should be accessible to everyone and that technology could solve problems that had seemed intractable for generations.
The woman she had become was driven by data and experience, leading a global company that was transforming how people thought about food production and nutrition. But at her core, she remained committed to the same simple mission that had started everything: helping people live healthier lives by growing their own food. As Harper boarded her flight back to San Diego, she opened her laptop and began drafting an email to her team about the next phase of their global expansion. There were new markets to enter, new technologies to develop, new partnerships to forge. The work of changing the world, she had learned, was never finished. It just evolved and expanded as success created new opportunities for impact. But first, she opened her customer email folder and read the latest messages from families whose lives had been changed by the ability to grow their own food. Each email was a reminder of why she had started this journey and validation that the risks, sacrifices, and struggles had been worth it. The last email was from a grandmother in rural Iowa who had been using her smart garden pod to teach her grandchildren about nutrition and sustainability. The message included a photo of 3 children proudly holding vegetables they had grown themselves, their faces bright with the same excitement that Harper had seen in David's eyes years earlier. "Dear Harper," the email concluded, "thank you for creating something that brings families together and teaches children that they can grow their own healthy food. You've given us the gift of self-sufficiency and the joy of growing something beautiful. My grandchildren will never forget the lessons they've learned from your invention." Harper closed her laptop and looked out the airplane window at the patchwork of farms and cities below. Somewhere down there, in kitchens and classrooms and community centers, millions of people were growing their own fresh food using technology that had started as a desperate attempt to solve her own problems. The stupid invention that Marcus had laughed at had become a global platform for health, education, and sustainability. The journey from rejection to recognition had taken 10 years, but Harper knew it was just the beginning. There were still billions of people without reliable access to fresh produce, millions of children growing up without understanding where their food came from, countless communities struggling with food insecurity and nutrition-related health problems. But Harper had learned something that no business school or consulting firm could have taught her: the power of persistent innovation to solve problems that others considered impossible. One device at a time, one family at a time, one community at a time, the world was changing. And Harper, the woman who couldn't keep a basil plant alive, had started it all.